The Shadow Realm of Elden Ring offers many new mysteries for us to explore. From a new batch of decrepit ruins to oddly unused Erdtree ritual pieces, there is no shortage of enigmatic events and enemies that we can delve into and research. But among these secrecies, a few stand out in being not only vague, but also weird. There are the aging untouchables, a Yarnum-like creature with a new frenzied fervor. There are the giant lampreys, who are mysteriously connected to the fingers. But even among these freaky foes, there is one other that is blessed with even less exposition. They are found throughout the Shadowland, popping up in more areas of the DLC than almost any other enemy. They have a friend from the base game, but otherwise they are wholly unique to these new lands. They seem to even be part of the land itself. The creature I want to discuss in this video may be the most mysterious enemy in all of the Shadow of the Erdtree. And just like their base game contender, they seem to have a few names.
Who's that Pokemon?
Blue Worm, according to Fextra and some others online. Ray Chinanago, according to the game's internal files, and Spirit Eel, according to some translations. Join me in this video as we do our best to sleuth out the story of this new enemy with no written lore or in-game reference. Let's find out what these giant blue eels really are. And as we begin, feel free to subscribe to stay up to date with my content and to support the channel. Also, a big thank you to my patrons who do support me and the channel on Patreon. And now, let's begin our investigation.
It's
Ray Chinanago. As the new title suggests, I think this enemy is the DLC's least described foe, with literally no explicit reference. Other enemies like the Untouchables and the Lampreys are not described in big detail, but they do have some references by name in items like the Age 1's Exaltation and the Pearlescent Scale. In contrast, no item references or even tells us the name of these giant blue worms. So that's a good place to start. What should we call these enemies? Fortunately, like the stone lookouts of the base game, we can find an official name for the enemy by looking at tangential nomenclature, stuff a normal player never sees but still comes directly from Software. But unlike the lookout stones, whose internal file reference name is the goofy Alive Stone, these enemies have a more substantial internal codename. It is, in Japanese, Rei Chinanago. Here, Rei can be translated as ghost or spirit, and Chinanago can be translated as spotted garden eel, which is a small ocean floor species of eel. The chin in the name might be a reference to the Japanese chin dog, with the eels potentially looking similar to the face of the dog. I tried researching the word chin, and I've not been able to find much that is conclusive, but if this is right, then maybe these are a new form of dog in Elden Ring. Another odd bit of trivia around this name is that the newest Animal Crossing game also mentions how this animal might derive its name from a group of the eels looking like plants sprouting in a garden. So, eel seems like a better name than worm, for instance, as these creatures do resemble the ocean's garden eels, especially how they show up in groups and how they are anchored to the ground. And with their blue hue matching that of the base game's spirit jellyfish, which is an official name, then a good final name for these entities is Spirit Eel or Spirit Garden Eel, if you want to more closely match the inspiring animal. Bandai Namco also did a Twitch release of emotes as part of the DLC's release, and one of them is a cartoon version of this enemy, and it is named Spirit Eel, so more reason to find the name to be a proper fit. So we have a name, and beyond that, the Spirit Eels also share behavior with their real-world counterparts too. In the ocean, garden eels make small burrows and normally hang out in them partially anchored, letting ocean currents bring along tiny zooplankton, which the eels then eat. Now, we don't see the in-game version eating anything, but I'll return to that later. Otherwise, they do kind of passively float, anchored to their burrows in a similar way. Also, like the real ones, these spirit eels will burrow into their holes. We can sometimes find them completely scrunched up inside of them. And possibly beyond the garden eels, the spirit ones will turn red when provoked, like the spirit jellyfish, and attack. Some are even primed to attack from the very first moment we see them, in a default red state. I haven't found any evidence that real garden eels will turn red if they get ready to attack. When the spirit ones do attack, they have some swinging moves, kind of like the stone lookouts. But they also have an attack where they kind of puke up their guts and drain the player's stamina. This doesn't seem to be taken from the garden eels either, but it is similar to an attack method used by other aquatic creatures, like sea cucumbers or ribbon worms. The stamina draining aspect of the attack helps build another connection too. Stamina in Elden Ring is determined by the endurance stat and affected by turtle-themed items, like the Great Turtle Shell Shield and the Green Turtle Talisman. In the DLC, we can find the upgraded two-headed turtle talisman in a hidden-away watery cave. Not only does this item connect to the divine spiral we talked about in my last video, it also links back to our eels. After all, the cave is defended by a number of instantly aggressive spirit eels. Plus, there's a turtle here too. The talisman boosts stamina recovery, which is close to the opposite effect that the eel's attack causes, stamina draining. So the eel's power is kind of in line with the turtles and their stamina impact, it just reverses the flow by draining stamina. When talking about their stamina impacts, these turtle items speak of tirelessness and inexhaustible power. If we want to eke out a lore connection for our eels here, maybe we could say that this relates them to natural energy and its sources in the land. Like turtles, they are in tune with the vast reserves of energy present in the natural world, and this is how the relations of tirelessness and inexhaustible power come about. The eels are draining that power, whereas the turtles are giving it. Now maybe this is all a stretch since we don't have much actual lore on the concept of stamina in the game, but the rest of the eel's connections might back this idea up, even if just a bit, so bear with me for now. Along with being around turtles, the spirit eels are generally found near other parts of the natural world, like grass and water. And the only other places we find them outside of this are natural areas that have grave associations. Here is a map of every spirit eel colony I could find. Let me know in the comments if I've missed any, but at least for these ones, I believe every group is on natural, undisturbed land, with lots of them being near or in bodies of water or among graves. Some are found near man-made structures, but they are never sprouting out of assembled stone or inside any buildings or keeps. I think their connection to the real ground is very important. But if there's a counterexample to this in the game in a group that I missed, please feel free to tell me. All of the natural land connections might build on my turtle energy idea, and the grave connections might tell us what kind of energy the eels are in tune with. We find a few groups of eels amidst the ghost graves of the gravesite plain, and we can find the largest density of them anywhere in the game along the southern shore, within Cairo's hidden grave and the Cerulean coast. This section, in addition to being a conspiracy about the twin bird's dead body, is rife with graves, blooming flowers, and rain showers. Natural energy abounds here, alongside a lot of death and a greatest hits of Elden Ring's loreless enemies, like the cemetery shades and the lightning wisps we saw in previous videos. The eels are definitely in good company. Not to mention that this area is also the lead up to the one area in the DLC that features the stone lookouts, the premier loreless enemy from the base game. So to state my conclusion up front, I think the evidence points to these eels as being associated with the cycle of death and rebirth here in the Shadowlands. The natural cycle, not the man-made one the Hornsent were doing with the jars. We know from the suppressing pillar that all manners of death wash up here in the Land of Shadows. The wash-up wording relates to water, specifically oceans and beaches. And we can see more of this deathly water connection in the DLC with the giant stone coffins. Plus, we have plenty of aquatic connections to death with the base game. Godwyn being a dead merman, the Tibia mariners and their boats, even the spirit jellyfish. With all of this, I think the spirit eels would fit right at home if we view them as part of this watery death theme. Plus, the only item they drop upon death supports this connection. Killing these generally passive floaties will cause them to drop either Ghost Glowwort or Grave Glowwort, both of which connect to catacombs, spirits, and their summoning. With the spirit eels dropping these items, and the original garden eels being plankton eaters, I think we can view the in-game version as filter feeders who eat or consume spirits or spiritual energy. With all the death washing up to this land, the eels could be part of the food chain, so to speak, that helps process the dead and spirits, moving them along through the natural world and lands. Needing a connection to death and or the natural world would explain the locations we find them in, peppered around the Shadow Realm, helping to process all the tides of the spirits. In Zuli's video on these guys, she pointed out that the eel face could show inspiration from Japanese forest spirits called Kodama. I think in general, the concept of Kodama could be an influence to these eels, as they also seem to be natural spirits, spirits of the natural world. However, Zuli also says that these Kodama are also drawn with similar faces to the eels, and that could be a point of connection, and uses the depiction from Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke. Now, the depiction from this movie is the only one I can find of Kodama that look like this. So maybe Ghibli's spirits are a specific inspiration for the Spirit Eels, but this doesn't seem like a common depiction style. Though I'm not Japanese, so I am quite unsure. But a connection to at least the Ghibli ones does seem apparent to me. Overall, I think we have good reason to view these eels, like the Kodama, as spirits of the natural world. In the eels' case, they're a little bit more water-themed than forest, and they also have a tinge of a process in death. In the Shadowlands, they seem to serve a role in the proceeding of the dead, possibly helping them along, feeding on spirit energy, and maybe depositing it back into the land, or otherwise processing it. If all death washes up here and there is a cycle of death and rebirth, then it makes sense that if it's anything like the real world, there will need to be an ecosystem and creatures that help this along, and the eels could be the base or backbone of that process. Like the Stone Lookouts, these lanky, bendy beings give us some tentative conclusions to draw, but due to their lack of explicitly explained lore, we have to satisfy ourselves with conjecture. I don't think there is much more we can ascertain about these creatures, especially not for certain, but let me know in the comments if there are any eel-based conclusions I have missed. These guys might serve an out-of-the-main spotlight role, but if they do help process the dead, these blue eel dogs could be some of the most important creatures in the land, helping to make sure the base of the spiritual cycle keeps flowing. And that could be important for the lands between too, since a lot of the dead from the lands between seems to also wash up here. And from a gameplay perspective, to most players, the Spirit Eel's stark, kind of cute design and general passiveness make them somewhat of a friend in this hostile, genocide-rife land. Most of the times you see them, you know it's not going to be a big intense fight because most of them are not aggroed. So it's a nice time to just enjoy part of the wildlife and scenery with a cool blue wavy dude. For that, we can only thank the Spirit Eels and the respite they bring with their wobbly, wavy stature. And in the same vein, I would like to thank you, viewer, for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the exploration, and let me know if you would like to see any more obscurities of the DLC featured on the channel. In the meantime, I may turn back to a more central topic, like Midra or even Mesmer. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.